Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Film London Jarman Award weekend, live online at the Whitechapel Gallery. I'm Greta Hewison, the production coordinator at Film London Artist Moving Image Network, or FLAMIN for short, and we organise the Jarman Award. I'm so pleased to introduce the next shortlisted artists presenting Project Artworks, but before I do, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about how the afternoon is going to go. After Project Artworks present, we'll be going straight into a break, and we encourage you to use this break to watch Jenn Nkiru's film, Hubtones, as she will be discussing the work in the next portion of the afternoon. A YouTube link to Hubtones will be made available in the chat, and a link is already live on the Whitechapel event page now. In this next section, there is again the opportunity to ask questions using the chat function, and we really encourage you to do so throughout the event. You don't need to wait until the end. For those of you that would like them, transcripts of the pre-recorded film footage will be made available in the chat now. So to introduce Project Artworks. Project Artworks is a collective whose collaborations, projects, events, and studio actions challenge societal definitions of care, creative intent, value, communication, and identity. Their programs evolve through their studio practice and radiate out into the cultural and care sectors. Kate Adams and Tim Corrigan, representing Project Artworks this afternoon, will be presenting different film works from their practice, alongside an in conversation with Mark Seeley from Autograph ABP, and we'll also hear from some of their collaborators. Kate and Tim, thank you so much for being here this afternoon and for sharing your work with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Greta. Thanks very much, and for the opportunity to speak to you all. So thanks for the introduction, and that saves us a little bit of time, but it's great to be here. And we had hoped to be physically present during the weekend event at Whitechapel. Physical environmental encounters can be more easily facilitated to enable people to engage on their own terms than online settings that lend themselves more to different kinds of discourse and interaction. But our programme of 40 minutes seeks to bring neurodivergent voices and presence into the room in a way I guess that compensates a little for the inaccessibility of the form for them through film and insights from caregivers and close collaborators. So we'll introduce each section as we go along and make time for questions or conversation with you at the end. But please do, interrupt us or ask questions in the chat so that we can respond. But first off, we're going to show a short film from actually very early on in our practice, about 20 years ago, that traces a creative encounter using paint as a point of connection between John Cole, a painter and one of the co-founders of Project Artworks, and Jamie, an autistic boy who was regarded as having behaviours described as challenging. And the encounters flows through a kind of limitless scenario that arrives eventually at a point of equity between, for both John and Jamie. But this approach, as revealed in the film, I think is very central still to our studio practice and the way we work. Our studio is based in Hastings. And it's followed and responded to by Mark Seeley, director of Autograph. Autograph have been exceptional collaborators over the last few years. And they, through a form of visual activism, promote a greater representation in all that they do. And Mark's generosity, we're very grateful for his generous time and consideration of the work. And we pre-recorded this interview earlier this week. Is there anything you want to say?
No, just to cue video 1.
See you in a bit.
What was splashing in the water?
That's a beautiful splash. Down there. And then back again. Great mixing, Jamie, great mixing. You're mixing this, getting lighter and lighter, this green, isn't it? The white. It's getting lovely. Right, that one. Look at this. What happens if we take this away? What happens if we scrape through here? Ready? Ready? Ready?
Hang on.
Back to orange.
Back to orange.
And then we can cover it up again.
Back.
You've done it. You've done it. Now you're going to do it. Take this away. Ready? Push it. Excellent. Excellent. Back to the orange. Top off. That's quite a lot, isn't it? Draw it. What about the this then? What about the this? Do you reckon like a line on that? If we pressed hard then, you'd see the orange underneath it now. Look at that.
What about blue?
What about blue? See, Jamie, what we've got here, we've got green, yellow, blue, and we've got all that orange all over there. We're quite happy with it just down here, aren't we? Hmm? Huh? Over there? What have we put over? Oh dear.
Jamie, let's do it down up here.
Shall we,
That's good, man.
that's it. See if you can make it over there to Kate.
Ooh, look, blue, come this way.
Oh, Jay, have a little rest.
Make that face pink.
Oh, I think so.
One of the problems that I have, Kate, with the world that we work on, when people start talking about inclusion and diversity, etc., is that there's almost as if there's a kind of right way to do everything, that everybody wants the right way to do something. It's almost as if we can't get out of this kind of prescriptive way of thinking. And for the limited experience that I have with working in a kind of neurodiverse way, or thinking outside the box, or trying to even understand the complexities of race, is that there is no one set space for all of that. I mean, there's a direction of flow, I would say, where I think the word care comes into being. But if we take age and time and, you know, experience of institutions and all of these things, whether even the atmosphere which we live in, then we have to try and use all the tools we've got, including film, to help us get to a better place of understanding, rather than be formulaic about everything we do. So that film, for me, when I look at it, I was like thinking, wow, there's a learning zone, I would imagine, while all this is going on.
What happened is, by enabling that freedom, that Jamie also brought it back, and he understood what he'd done in covering John in blue paint, and then towards the end covered himself in green paint in order to equalize it. So he was leading this process of equity and eliminating hierarchies between him and John as a sort of teacher facilitator figure, because he was in that context of a school which created that for him. And so that was a very complex process that was a search for the individual. That's quite a powerful thing, really, isn't it? That the idea of being able to create an environment where you can do that and see how it's processed through the time of that. We've seen that where people feel as though they might have crossed the barrier, and then they'll pull themselves into that barrier as well. It's like, I want to be in that space too. I've done this to share, not to actually do it to you as a process of harm. I've done it to test where the boundaries are, and now I also want to go to those. I also want to be in that space too. One, but I imagine it felt brilliant, and I did worry for John as he's wiping the stuff out of his eyes. But two, then all of a sudden you've got a little green kid there, which is amazing. Which is like, there's a blue bloke and a green kid, and an orange space which has just been transformed.
And it's like, it does feel as though there is a kind of a free fall, which I think is not a harmful space, but a safe space to free fall.
It's creating a form of freedom that we are unused to, is bringing people into a leadership role who are used to being seen, or who are placed in the role of vulnerable or needing care.
Yeah.
And it's a very complex relationship.
I would argue that like the coloniality of making, I know this is a weird term, but the coloniality of making has been so, you know, Eurocentricized that anything else becomes either kind of tribal or made something else, or just not taken seriously, or studied for other reasons, let's say, rather than for parity. And I think, you know, for me, I have no doubt that people like Jamie or Sharif or the Project Artworks project, you know, provides a really interesting conversation about how we read, what we see, and who has a voice in that space. I think that's the key, really. And why we have to look at that. Why can't we look at the next phase of the argument is like, how do we begin to understand the formal qualities of work within the work? So how do we begin to talk about the work is doing? And I think that's really, really important, beginning to read about it and write about it in a way that does then give it kind of critical equity rather than social equity.
We can't work and then walk away because,
No.
you know, we can't do something and then go, right, well, we'll see you next week. Or if you can't, if your care package comes down, just come back to us when you've set up a new one that enables you to come. You know, we have to grapple with the systemic elements of a person's world as well, because if you rely on systems in order to just have the most basic freedom, then those systems have to be addressed and they have to be understood and harnessed to enable a person to have the freedom to engage.
Well, that's the rights-based issue as well within it as well. It's like what rights do you really want people to have? And I think, again, it seems to be a very long and difficult road for people to understand, you know, civil rights for people, really. And we know, and people talk about things being resource heavy, but you know, are they that heavy in comparison to all the wastage that kind of goes on out there? You know, if we look at, you know, we would have to look at what the value. That's the key. I keep on using this word these days. It's like, you know, the value of that. If you can look across a society and think, I'm part of that values the treatment of these people in this way, you know, that we've done the best, that we can honestly look at ourselves as politicians or as people in the community and honestly say, this is the best that we can do, then I think that's a really good place to kind of get to. But at the moment, it feels like this is the most that I'm prepared to give you, or the least I'm prepared to give you to keep you quiet. And I think that's from like education, healthcare, as we can see, and you know, even in kind of points of access. And we could do so much more, couldn't we? So much more. People want societal change, and we do, and we want, you know, civil rights in the 60s. You know, the Green Common feminist movements, or, you know, gay liberation rights. You know, I mean, we're talking long trajectories of conversations that get massive setbacks depending on the type of leaderships that we're in or the societies that we live in. You know, tragically, it seems to me that, you know, most of the world's populations are still living under extreme kind of conditions of violence, but they just can't see the violence because it's a very soft type violence. It's not the kind of violence that drags you on the street and hangs you up the way that they used to be able to do to people. It's not the kind of violence that ridicules those people that aren't seemingly normal or puts them into, you know, debasing situations for spectacle. But there is a kind of violence out there, that kind of, you know, the violence that means that everything you do is a struggle, right? Just to have a life. That everything you do is a struggle in that space, and that's pretty heavy going on a daily basis. That's pretty violent. The idea that, you know, even filling in a form or having to go to an institution or being cast as a scrounger or I mean, I do think there's a kind of, to be extreme, it's a kind of latent level of fascism that runs under people, that runs under many regimes, which says that I'd rather get rid of you than help you. Yeah. I guess my mission really is that you want to get over those patronizing kind of barriers that people have, that they come to you almost immediately, almost as a kind of default position. It's almost as if they wake up every day and they reset themselves to be incredibly patronizing to those which they see as other, disabled, gay, queer, all those kind of others. There's a sense of, which is why I guess I argue with the idea of the way that some people use empathy. It's not, no one wants any sympathy. People want to get, you've got to actually just get close to people, and then the rest of the stuff goes away. So I think that's really important. And I think film, rather than just looking at the thing that someone has made, you stand back and you admire. Understanding the conditions of which something is made in is really, really important, because that, whether that's a kind of domestic situation or whether that's a studio environment, I think we have to do that. And I think if the filming of a process communicates that really well, and it becomes part of how you theorize the practice, and therefore we can talk about the praxis of it, then I think we're in a good place. I mean, showing Sharif's film alongside his paintings, it really helps people kind of just be present the way that he is, in a sense. I think that's really important. So I think the film that you made with Sharif, and then understanding the conditions of the painting, it almost joins the dots that help. I just think it's a really, really important way to have a conversation with people in a way that they're familiar with as well. And I think if you can go on a journey in time, the temporality of, say, Sharif's experience communicated through that film absolutely implicitly helped me understand the things that he was trying to communicate through his drawing and painting, without a doubt. And it might be that in the time that I encounter the paintings and the first time, say, in a studio, that he wants to have or share that conversation. So at least the filming of that conversation, when he's in a more, let's just say, familiar environment, helps anybody understand what the artist is trying to do.
Thanks, Mark. That was fantastic. So the Sharif, who Mark's talking about in that last part of the conversation, is a 26-year-old man who's autistic. He came into the orbit of Project Artworks really as a child at school, and we've worked with him for a long time. So much of our work is about developing relationships with people, with their families, with their support teams, with the social care sector and the cultural sector. And so a lot of our work is based in these long-term trust-based relationships. Sharif, so we just thought it'd be great to show the film that Mark was talking about there, which featured in his exhibition. He had a solo show at Autograph last year. And so we could just cue video 3.
I like going into the toilet, fake sneezing, fake nose blowing, fake hiccuping. So I heard with Sharif, he had a fire, is that right, Tim? His shoes got burnt, his weather books got burnt. He rescued his jacket from the fire, his father rescued his jacket from the fire. When my house was on fire as well, I was running up the streets screaming and shouting and crying as well. Then Dad said to the police as well, I'm sorry, it's all right, I've got my son here, he's autistic, he has autism, he can't help it sometimes. I never want anything, it's easy, buy whatever I need. Look at my hopes, look at my dreams, I can't see. What else? And hay fever before?
Yeah.
Any allergies?
Cats.
Any, Have you ever had any dreams before, am I?
Yeah, I have lots of dreams.
What did you have dreams about?
I did a show last night, and then I had a dream last night about the show, in which I was watching the show while I was on stage doing the show at the same time, and I forgot all the words.
Have you ever had any nightmares before that, Mark?
Plenty.
Dimples, freckles, watches, the dot on the kettle, Uncle Dax's dimple, Nanny coughing, Nanny sneezing. My mother had to put plaster over her dimple. My grandmother had to get out of the car and cough. Then she had to tell me she was going to sneeze specially for me. Then they had to change the kettle specially for me as well. They had to cover up the window with a curtain. Grandad had to get rid of the Philips radio.
So that was Sharif, sort of really representing himself, and the film really was a culmination of lots of other video work that he made and makes, and the way that we collaborate is really sort of determined by him, and as facilitating artists, I guess, we look to expand on the strengths and of who we're working with. And Sharif, he has the way that he operates a lot of times in the world is through recording himself on his phone and these sort of testimonies. So the mask really was a sort of a natural kind of product of how he actually operates in the world.
Mm. I mean, film in that sense is we've always used it in our practice as a record of experience and a very sort of visceral placing of someone on their own terms within a sort of public space. The next film features my son Paul, and it's a lead into the work that we've done over the last 15 years in landscapes and different environments. So we were out together on this wild beach on New Year's Day, and the film, I think, reveals the sensory nature of his connection with landscape and phenomena. And whilst he can be incredibly disabled by some environments, somehow here he was free, unencumbered, and he had absorbed the immense energy of the open beach during this incredibly wild day and low tide and the wind. And it was filmed in a single take, and at times I follow him with the camera, fearful of him running off into sinking sand or the rivers that permeate the shoreline here. But again, this was the start of this longer inquiry within Project Artworks about what it is to experience environments without the full assimilation of what they are, or knowledge of what they are, the property of things. And this leads us eventually to illuminating the wilderness that's been on the Jarman tour, but we can talk about that later. So cue New Year's Day.
back. It's very strange, actually, giving this presentation to an audience because we can't see any of the audience. All we can see is ourselves, and we're sort of telling ourselves things we already know. But so that was 16 years ago,
16, yeah.
16 years ago, that film, and we've developed this sort of this idea of the landscape and people and what that brings, the freedom and that can bring to people, and how people operate in different landscapes. It's been a kind of a theme to our work. And when we went to make the film, which has been shared as part of the tour, which is Illuminating the Wilderness, which is a film about 6 neurodivergent artists that we know really well, who have worked with Project Artworks for a long time, and their families and support teams, and all of us. We all went to Scotland for a week. Well, we were there for 2 weeks, but we filmed for a week, and we made this film really that was about this idea of freedom and this idea of community and sort of a non-hierarchical community living up in Scotland for a week. And so when we first planned this presentation, we really wanted people to come and represent themselves, and we'd sort of planned an event where we'd show the film and we'd invite everyone that went on the trip, and obviously we weren't able to do that. So what we could do was to speak to some of the families that went and to just talk to them about the trip there and what it meant to them. And so we put together a short film of their responses really to being in Glen Affric with us. And so that's the final film that we'd like to show you, because we'd really love actually for our sort of neurodivergent community to represent themselves and to be here with us, because we are actually representing a large group of people. And so we hope to do that through this next clip.
And do please ask any questions, or get some questions ready if you would like us to talk more about anything that you've seen. Okay.
Cue film 5, Illuminating People. Thank you.
So, your holiday to Scotland, did you like it? Going on an aeroplane? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you like going on an aeroplane. The thing with Scotland was, it's the wilds, isn't it, Paul? It's like nowhere we've ever been before. You're out in the middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. You take an aeroplane with a big group of friends, and just spending that time in somewhere that seems so remote and inaccessible. It didn't seem possible.
When it was explained to me, it just seemed exciting. I was a bit nervous at the possibilities, and then I decided it was too interesting to ignore, and I would have regretted it possibly if we hadn't have gone. So that based my decision really. And the other reason was that I felt we were going with people that were understanding and we were familiar with, and I didn't feel afraid.
I think it was a good experience for us in that we found that we could do it, and I thought the family groups being all in different chalets was a good idea, because that made things simpler for each group, I think. So as a family, I think it was a very positive experience in that we all emerged from it in one piece, so with more confidence that this was something that we could do. It was very beneficial in that way.
Adventure is important, yes. New challenges, new experiences. Travel, I mean, you love travelling as well, don't you? You like going places. We've done quite a few little trips around the country, sort of quite locally, sort of Suffolk and Cornwall, I suppose. But just the act of leaving and going somewhere. new. I think it's challenging as well because you like the familiarity of your surroundings. Like you like going to artworks because you know everyone and you know the layout. So when you're in a new environment like Scotland, it's vast and sparse and open and crazy scenery, wasn't it? Like anything else. I just think that's so stimulating for you, for your brain, and just thinking, what is that mountain doing over there? I hope we don't have to go up it.
Gabby was, completely informed, and had she said to me that she hadn't wanted to go or she was dubious or anything like that, if I'd got that sense, then I would have had to say no. But no, she was very keen, particularly when she heard, some of the other characters that were going.
One thing's for certain with George and Sam is that cities are difficult. So, Glen Affric in that way was ideal. So we'd always be looking at the great outdoors and absence of crowds. So where we'd go next? Anywhere in the British Isles. I still don't think we're tempted to take George and Sam abroad because I don't think that they particularly would benefit or be interested in any of the things that being in a foreign country brings.
And just the landscape's so different. It's so impossibly varied. And those hills, watching you go down those hills, Paul, in the film, I was like, my heart was going a little bit like that. And like having all those people around you, that sort of making it possible by having such a wonderful group of people, this huge group of people, like the logistics of that holiday. It was a holiday, sort of. It was a working holiday, It was a working holiday. Just accessing that landscape takes such a skilled team of people, and not just people that know you really well, but people who are helping, other people experience that as well, and just the dynamic range of all the people. Somehow, even though everyone was so different, everyone got on really well because you're all in it together.
Yes, you're absolutely right to talk about them individually because they are extremely different from one another, and though they both have the same diagnosis of autism, they manifest it extremely differently, almost in some ways opposite to one another. So individually, for George, I think the overriding negative of his condition is anxiety, and that does manifest itself more acutely when he's away from home. He didn't suffer very strongly from it, actually, when we were in Glen Affric, partly probably because I was there, because I'm the sort of security for him, and partly because of all the familiar people from Project Artworks. But I think whenever George is away from home, he's always thinking, when and am I going to go home? Sam doesn't seem to suffer from anxiety. Or if he does, it's very, very submerged. Sam's autism is, it's very hard to say what the dominant characteristic is, but there's certainly a very strong sensory reaction to things, both good and bad. George is always asking himself and others questions. Why, what, when, what sort of anxiety questions. And I think Sam doesn't ask any questions. Sam just receives stimuli. I think that's a big difference between them.
Gabby is 25 and she has autistic spectrum disorder and complex needs and can have behaviours that challenge. She likes to be very independent. She knows her own mind. She likes to do things on her terms. She is very warm and loving, kind, can be very supportive, especially when it's really needed. She can get very angry at times when she panics at something or has high anxiety over something. She can be easily misunderstood, and behaviour can it can make some people judge her wrongly.
It's very similar to Scotland, but I like the going away with Paul for a period of time. I've done quite a few holidays, respites or breaks, because you get to spend a week or a weekend with Paul, and you get to see everything. You know, you get to see how Paul experiences with the mornings, you know, how Paul adapts to things being different in the bathrooms and the layouts, and, you know, and Paul can, with enough time and enough support and do most things, you just got to be a bit, we've got to make sure that Paul knows what's required. And just hanging out and having fun and, you know, doing those things, being in a completely different environment, you know, like in Scotland, learning where everything is that Paul wants, and, you know, showing Paul where his bedroom is. You know, I had on Scotland, for example, the first night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, Paul come and found me. And I think personally he just wanted to know that someone was there, because he came walking in, saw me, turned around and walked back into his bedroom, like to get back into bed. So to me, that was, he's just there.
George and Sam are power walkers, and they can run up hills very fast, as you may have noticed. And so there's no such thing really as a kind of slow amble with them. And so you just have to let them forge ahead. But we were really confident that we weren't going to lose them, because even though it looked as if we were perhaps leaving a dangerously large gap between us and them, we could actually sense the geography of the place, the path going on ahead meant we were confident that we weren't going to lose them. And I think that both of them, they like to be together, but they don't like to be like terribly close together. They always know where the other one is. And they decide, or it's usually George who decides who's going to go in front. Usually George goes in front, not always, but George orchestrates that. And so it's the norm for us to be plodding along behind.
We got an experience that is really treasured, we'll never forget, and I feel very passionate about. We were included, but there was no emphasis on you must, or this is what we're doing. So we had a freedom. I saw Gabby free to be herself. She was respected, she was valued, she was loved and wanted. And it was pleasant to be in an environment and amongst people who understood Gabriella, didn't judge her. And that made life really pleasant. So we got an awful lot from it.
Given that they're people who don't really speak to each other, they're actually very close. They do exchange a few words, but speech is not the main basis of their communication at all. But George particularly needs Sam to be around. He needs to know where Sam is, and Sam's a kind of security thing for him. And Sam less so, but he is completely tolerant of George nearly all the time. Yeah, they do. I mean, it's very hard to describe a sort of non-verbal closeness, but they do have it. And they have, after all, spent the vast majority of their life together.
What are we going to do today?
Yeah, well, today's a bit of a strange one, isn't it?
It is, isn't it?
It's not like we said about timetables and stuff. It's one of those ones where you have to...
Bit of huge music.
We've got the bus needs to go in for an MOT up in Hall, and we need to wait around for that and then go for a walk. You know, it's a bit of stuff like that which I think Paul would adjust very well to as well. You know, the change is really good. You know, what's going on here? We're going to get out here and go for a wander around, or find a cafe, do some exploring. You know, do that sort of stuff which you really enjoy. Difference.
You're the best.
Yeah.
I just want to add that you're the best, and I love you.
Will you have lunch out somewhere?
No, it depends. Yeah. I'm kind of thinking we should walk down to the Rye, because we've got to drop the bus off in the Ridge for a retest of the MOT. So I'm kind of thinking we should walk down to the Rye Bakery and get some nice sandwiches from down there. That's what I'm thinking. It's about time I bought you lunch, isn't it? You always buy me coffees and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah. But I think with the support workers, you just have to be really nice and patient and and understanding, really. And I think a lot of people have got that capacity. They just don't maybe see it as a real profession. And I think that needs to change, the sort of emphasis on a professional qualification, like maybe support workers being accredited, would really raise the profile. Yeah, definitely good rates of pay, you know. I think the job is, well, I mean, some people say it's demanding. Right, I was like, go to Scotland and that. And
yeah, go on an airplane.
I don't think she realised just how much of a contribution she was making just by being there, because I don't think that she necessarily realised her worth and what it meant to Project Artworks, what it would mean to society to be able to watch a film like Illuminating the Wilderness. So I don't think she was aware. But afterward, I think she was extremely proud of herself, and I think she felt very confident about having joined something like that, such an experience. When she found her name was on the credits, she cried. When she sees references to Illuminating the Wilderness, she runs off and she gets the booklet that was produced. And as the film, we watch it, then she'll sort of pick out the parts in the book that are coming up on the screen. Yeah, in answer, I don't think she was aware that she was contributing until afterwards, and then she realised what a contribution she'd made. And she was thrilled, yeah.
The Explorers Project has, I suppose, done what its name suggests in pushing the possibilities further. So would we, as a family on our own, have taken George and Sam off to an extremely remote part of the ancient Caledon forest? No, we wouldn't have done that. Are we glad we did that? Yes, we are. So, yeah, the Explorers Project put that into, that made it happen. If a similar project was available in the future, doing something similar, would we sign up for it? Yes, we would. So yeah, it's just about sort of literally exploring, isn't it?
Great. So
we thank you for sticking with that. We've got about 8 minutes and a few questions here. One of which is, how has COVID affected your practice and the way you work with people? Is the studio open? Studios are open right now, yes, they are. We've kept them open this second lockdown because there's a support group rule of 15, which we've been able to access. And also we've created more space across the studios to keep it, to mitigate against COVID. We also operate from a really low COVID infection rate here in Hastings. It's the lowest in the country, but we're not complacent. However, the other aspect of COVID is that it's really impacted people who have different kinds of care environments where they may be living in residential care that has a different set of rules. And so we've been supporting families to try and maintain access and contact with their adult children who are in care environments. I mean, I think that there are neurodivergent artists across the UK who are working with different support studios. And we know of several artists who are trapped in quite restrictive care environments and therefore haven't been able to actually function as artists and continue their practice, which is very worrying. And I think there's therefore a lot of our work has increased with the balance between creative opportunities and facilitation and productions alongside rights-based advocacy.
Yeah, I'd just add to that our work throughout from the time that we've started has always sort of responded to the shifting landscape, political landscape around the people we collaborate with. And so COVID obviously has presented a new set of sort of limitations, challenges, constraints to work with, but it's also presented certain opportunities and ways to work with people. Before COVID would be austerity, and it kind of goes on. So as a rights-based organisation, we adjust to working with the things that impact the lives of the people we work with.
Absolutely. Another question is, how do you navigate consent when filming or working in the studio environment if someone doesn't communicate verbally? Well, that's a good question. Okay, so the thing is that if someone doesn't use language to communicate, it doesn't mean that they can't communicate. It means that there is actually a much more expansive way of communicating. It's not reductive non-verbalness. So what happens is that through a process of active listening and setting an environment up that enables us to really connect with people, you can monitor assent and dissent as a creative interaction evolves. So that's carefully kind of considered and monitored. And actually, we often use that method to arrive at consent for productions and share the process of productions with people too. Another one. Question, can you talk more about the Explorers project? Okay. Explorers was a 3-year program of art and collaboration, of which Illuminating the Wilderness was a new production that we made. But the primary metaphor for Explorers as a big project was wilderness. And we used that idea to work in collaboration with different galleries and cultural organisations across the UK and actually in Sydney, Australia. We worked with the Experimental Art Faculty of the University of New South Wales, Autograph, MK Gallery, Tate Liverpool, Photoworks, Fabrica. Anyone else? The project essentially involved a series of encounters between these different organisations and neurodivergent communities around them, and workshops working with the whole organisation to sort of transcend preconceptions around disability, and also just open up that whole sector of neuro-minorities around where they were, and also developed 6 co-commissions, and each partner put on an exhibition in year 3. So last year in 2019, there were 6 public exhibitions that were either with, by, or for people with complex needs.
Yeah, I'd say that Explorers came out of a lot of work collaborating with other cultural organisations over a sort of long period of time. And the idea being that because we're working with quite marginalised groups often, sort of ask that question why they weren't more reflected in the audiences or the programming of mainstream cultural organisations. So the idea really was to develop relationships between these cultural organisations and the social care sector that was sort of local to them. So a big part of Explorers was, as Kate said, was sort of mapping the social care sector and making these sort of physical Google maps of the social care sector around the organisations that we collaborated with, and to then sort of develop these relationships, or to broker these relationships between the cultural organisation and these social care groups, so that when we sort of step back, that those relationships would then thrive and be developed.
And they are. I mean, it's really extraordinary. Some great work going on, and we intend to go again. And I'm sorry, but it looks like that's what's the time? That's the last question.
26.
And just a quick question of how do you meet the people that we work with on these films? They come to us through social work teams and
this is quite a small,
families.
Yeah, I mean the crew, the people that we work with here, we work with up to 40 neurodivergent, neuro-minority artists from our studio base here. Collaboratively in our Explorers program, we work with a lot more, but the crew that we work with here, we've known for quite a long period of time. So a lot of them we've met through the school, and they've grown up, or as Kate said, they're referred by the social care settings they're in. So because it's quite a small community, actually, the people that we work with on a regular basis, and the people that we work with and who collaborate with us on the film works, we tend to have known for quite a long period of time.
Yeah, and there's just that because there aren't higher education opportunities for people to go through art school, we create a bespoke art school foundation course kind of environment where art and creativity is explored and personal pathways can develop and be supported. So, I think that's it.
Just like to say thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being there. Thank you to Film London and to Whitechapel. And have a good rest of the day.